Welcome back to the second part of the 5th Circular Change Conference, Mainstreaming the Circular Economy Mindset. So now we are entering the second panel discussion with our distinguished guests. So among them, Cliona Howie, Head of Circular Economy Development and Transition for EIT Climate-KIC, Janja Kreitmeier-McKinsey, Secretary Ministry for the Environment and Spatial Planning, Slovenia, Mojca Marchesetti, Head of Sustainability and Regulatory Affairs at Iskra Emeco, and Gregor Skender, Senior Manager at Deloitte, Slovenia. So we will start first with Cliona, who will give us an insight into the deep demonstration project taking place in Slovenia, and then we will continue with 3 Slovenians here in the studio. So more vivid discussion in the second part. We are privileged to share this space today and also have a small talk. So first, Cliona, we are welcoming you, still unfortunately online, but hopefully soon also in Slovenia. Please.
Thank you, Nadia, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope you had a good and relaxing 5-minute break. Now we're really jumping into some exciting parts of our discussion today to continue discussing, thinking, and really imagining what circular economy transition means on the ground and not just theorizing about it. So thank you all for having me here today. It's a great pleasure to be here speaking to you, representing Climate-KIC and the broader deep demonstration for Slovenia. I'm going to share my screen now so that you can see a bit of my slides. Let me just put it in presentation mode. And Ladea, please shout if it is not correct, but I understand that you can see it. So Ladea has presented what we call the deep demonstration of a circular, regenerative, and low carbon economy. This is the result of 2 years of work that Climate-KIC and other partners, which I'll discuss in a moment, have been working on with the Slovenian government. As you heard, I'm just checking, is it in the correct settings? Now I believe it is. So as you heard our CEO speak earlier in the keynote speech today, what we're trying to do is move away from individual interventions on innovation to make change. Why? We are facing, as one of the other speakers mentioned today, not only pandemics and global crisis related to health, but also the global crisis on climate change. As many of you will know, and I'll speak about this, circular economy is one of the best tools for looking and studying whole systems change. Kirsten, our CEO at Climate-KIC, made reference to whole systems change and why new ideas and approaches are needed across the entire society, from civil society to policymakers to industry players and everything in between. Climate-KIC is dedicated to this whole systems change, and this is based on 10 years of experience and knowledge of financing what we call climate change innovation in Europe. This 10 years of experience, what has it taught us? So when Climate-KIC and the other KIC started off, KIC stands for, I remind you, Knowledge Innovation Community that Kirsten presented before. The KICs were looking at, in particular Climate-KIC, which is one of the older KICs, incremental innovation. So looking at project on a project by project basis, looking how to finance project by project, that in many cases, in most of the cases, resulted in fantastic outcomes, but they were very fragmented activities. They were not connected. And whilst they had improvements and advances, both on technology, on learning, on actual impact on the ground, it wasn't at the scale that's really needed to meet the global climate change crisis, as well as now other aspects that have been brought into play from, for example, COVID and the pandemic, such as job creation, job resilience, better said. We talked about abundance, we talked about resilience. So this is all wrapped up into what we call systems information, where we are looking for transformational change, not incremental change. The theory behind systems innovation is, as you see in the center of the screen here, is a portfolio of interventions that are intrinsically linked to one another. In fact, they're dependent on one another. And one can't have success without being connected to the success of others. Going now into the story, the narrative around where this deep demonstration came from. Climate-KIC started speaking in 2018. In fact, this September marks 2 years that I had my first trip to Slovenia to meet with some of the ministries that were really visionary, really looking forward at what does circular economy mean when we talk about whole systems transformation. How does circular economy address the needs and challenges that we have here in Slovenia? As we progressed over 2 years, we initiated a relationship with 3 Slovenian ministries and now working with 9. And we've also working with other EU institutions such as another KIC, which is the Raw Materials KIC, and the Joint Research Center, which is an agency for the European Commission. Just to show you a little bit of the timeline here, I mentioned that we started talking around actually May 2018. September is when we really sat down. And January, as you'll see here on this timeline, January 2019, we started really scoping what does this partnership mean? What does an EU institutional approach mean to circular economy transition? What does it look like? What should it look like? What can it look like? And we really started diving deep into the design part of that, taking into account multiple factors from what has exactly been done on the ground already in Slovenia, what has worked well, what has not worked well, who are the actors that are being leaders, visionaries, making already impact in Slovenia, such as circular change. Who are all those actors that have contributed already to advancement and to progress? How do we design something that builds on that, enhances and complements it, whilst taking us further to meeting circular challenges, all the while learning and studying what are the new advances, for example, circular economy tools, metrics, etc., that some of the other speakers mentioned today. So where we're at now is we're finishing up inception and planning, and now moving into implementation, which I'll talk a little bit further about now. What's the design behind this deep demonstration? So when we talk about incremental change versus transformational change, what's happening in incremental change is there's focus on how innovation can meet challenges, overcome barriers for certain what we call levers of change. When we talk about transformational change, we're saying what are all the key levers of change and how do we design an initiative that touches upon all of them simultaneously with equal importance, and most importantly, as I mentioned, links them together. So here in this slide, you see some of those key levers of change. Many of them have been mentioned today, whereas we talked about the role of the public administration, of getting policy right so that the regulatory frameworks are there as a solid structure to support transformational change. We talked about behavioral change of citizens, of policymakers, of designers, producers. We've talked about, and I've seen a question in the chat regarding our financial system. How does our fiscal policy truly support circular economy compared to a linear economy? And if it doesn't, where are those gaps and what can be changed so that we can adapt a fiscal policy support to a circular economy society? And that kind of fiscal change needs to happen not only at top-down level, but also at bottom, including tax. And I saw in the questions and answers, someone asked about tax reform, but in other ways that I'll discuss in a little bit, in a bit. But touching on technology, touching on citizen participation, education and skills, increasing the capacity of all those stakeholders included, from mothers of young children to policymakers, to business owners, to everyone in between. What is the capacity and competencies that we need to be able to be competitive in a circular economy society? How do we increase the capacity and skills of those involved? What are the competencies? Do we have clear what they are? And how do we enhance them? Built into this design as well, we're saying we've identified what are the key levers of change. What are all the stakeholders that need to be need to benefit from something like a deep demonstration in Slovenia. And where do we go about doing it? How do we do it? So we mentioned public policy, the role of the public administration. This is really, really fundamental, as mentioned by Barna, and why we have engaged so intensely and heavily over the last years with those ministries that were mentioned. So really looking at how does policy and public funding support circular economy transition. Climate-KIC is also leading another very large European project on actually changing the way that public funding can fund circular economy. So what we see is a very fragmented, incremental framework right now, and we're working on a strategic research innovation agenda to establish a coordinated joint public funding approach where you can public fund across different public actors so that you can address circular economy challenges, which indeed circular economy does not stay within only the waste sector, only the technology sector, et cetera, et cetera. It needs to be cross-cutting across all sectors and across levers of change. Inside the design of the deep demonstration is also a very sophisticated network that orchestrates all the actors together so that you can address these specific challenges in a collaborative co-creation approach. This has been mentioned several times today, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of this. The word of our generation will be collaboration, and to do open collaboration. There is no way we can address these kind of challenges without this. I mentioned about transitioning economies from linear to circular. I've mentioned the changes in the fiscal financial sector. Also, what are the scientific methodologies for stakeholder engagement? How do we make sure we leave no one behind? How do we make sure it's socially inclusive? What scientific methodologies support this so that it's done properly? Finally, I've heard today several speakers also make reference to the transformation of whole value chains, not just looking at single points on the value chain, because this won't actually lead us to a holistic circular economy. It will almost lead us to advancement at certain points. So from the design concept, raw materials and design, all the way down to consumers. I'm going to touch very lightly on this because the following speaker is going to go into more detail for you, but this is a little bit an overview of what this deep demonstration looks like. Most importantly, we designed vertically on 3 pillars. How do you involve the community for social inclusiveness? How do you support the business and competitive needs for sustainable, resilient job growth and job creation? And finally, how does the public administration create the regulatory frameworks to ensure that policy supports all that's needed by the community and the business sectors? All of this across should help Slovenia not only meet resilient, competitive, strategic goals, but the sustainable development goals, which is also been mentioned as high importance for what we consider sustainable development. Across the bottom, you'll see here that there are some lever change. I mentioned the financial system, but how does the financial system, what are the particular places where, how, and when, and who can be involved in shaping a new fiscal framework for linear to circular shifts at society and business level? This is all done across 5 specific sectors in Slovenia that the next speaker will go into to discuss why these are important and how these design principles touch upon those sectors. Inside the square, you'll see several programs. So I mentioned before, what's the difference between incremental and transformational? Transformational is a portfolio, so a collection of many, many interventions, all designed thinking about each other, designed to be linked, and designed to touch upon all those key levers of change. So the programs that are actually inside the deep demonstration range from education at the school level for school children, capacity building for policymakers, for businesses, for city officials, public procurement was mentioned today as one of the key triggers of circular economy transition. So how do we ensure that public procurement is circular in its essence, not having a few procurement calls around circular economy? The opposite, integrating circular economy into everything that is publicly procured. And then hopefully that will influence as well private procurement. Circular performance. Today, Ian from Zero Waste Scotland mentioned metrics and tools. How do we know that we're achieving what we need to achieve? How are we sure that we're having what we call a good transition, a successful transition? Every step of the way needs to be monitored, evaluated, and fulfilled into a process that we call sense making, so that we are constantly and continually learning. We're talking about pushing boundaries here, boundaries that have not been pushed before. So how do we stay on top of one another? How do we provide checks and balances to say, we are achieving what we need to achieve, we are including, we are having social inclusion, we are meeting the needs of civil society, we are increasing the public capacity for new policy frameworks for circular economy. This circular performance program will look at all that to ensure that Slovenia is also competitive on a European and international benchmark. There are programs that address SME needs, as well as large industry needs, as well as the startups needs. So in circular economy, we know that there's a lot done, there's a lot known, but we also know that we still need disruptive innovation that's going to change the way we live and we work, that will better suit our needs in comfortableness, in convenience, but also most importantly in sustainability and resilience needs. Overarching this entire deep demonstration, there is also plans to establish a circular economy center at the national level for Slovenia, to really put Slovenia on the map, to demonstrate to all those inside Europe and outside that Slovenia is committed to this, and most importantly, Slovenia is committed to the learning and the sharing of knowledge to be able to position itself, to better position itself for funds according to the Green New Deal, according to the Recovery Fund, and according to the other goals that I mentioned, like sustainable development goals, quality of living goals, etc. Looking a little bit at what the impact on the ground will be. I know that this conference is really keen on understanding what does circular economy do on the ground. And this deep demonstration, you'll hear more about it, as I said, from the next speaker on the value chain selected and what kind of activity. But there'll be 5 key Slovenian economic systems impacted on. We're looking at the activation of 200 communities, looking at how the operational program is set up in Slovenia, 1,000 companies, looking at new products on the market to increase the competitiveness of the Slovenian economy, looking at regional action plans to ensure that no one is left behind, that all stakeholders of society, whether they're in urban or rural communities, play a part in this and benefit from this deep demonstration, to leverage outside investment into the Slovenian economy through that resilience, through that competitiveness, through that job growth and new ideas that transforming whole value chains. This will also, as I mentioned, really look at positioning Slovenia to be a front runner and a leader on circular economy, which will allow it to better apply for new what we call next generation European funds. So right now Europe is in a shift. We have just finished a programming period. We're moving into a new programming period, and that new programming period is 100% focused on circular economy. How can we ensure that Slovenia is prepared, anticipate correctly, and at the front of the line for receiving next generation European funding? I will stop there, Ladea, so we have time for a question.
Yeah.
And we can go into any more detail that's needed. Thank you.
So it was great overview. So I'm sure now we understand better what Deep Demonstration Project is bringing, or at least what is the ambition of it. I have a question. Back in 2017, when we were introducing the first circular economy roadmap for Slovenia, we introduced also the circular triangle, connecting circular change, circular economy, and circular culture, exactly as you mentioned today. today, that it is so important to orchestrate all the stakeholders, the interests, and really to co-create these solutions. So sometimes it is, I will be very open, sometimes it's easier if you are not coming from the country where such systemic changes are implemented. So most likely, therefore, we are working elsewhere as well, and you are coming to Slovenia. So from your point of view, what do you see is the main obstacle or the barrier that in those last 3 years, this collaboration between different stakeholders and between private and public sector has not resulted in this, let's say, Center for Circular Economy or whatever, because that is exactly what we need and what we have proved, and we have heard Frick how Holland is successful just because of that. So maybe your point of view on that, what is needed to overcome this barrier?
So thank you, Nadia, for the question. Firstly, I would say that any work that was done previous in 2017, including the roadmap, are all building blocks for whatever this deep demonstration represents. Like I said, a lot of effort has been already done, and a lot of success has already been achieved in Slovenia. So that needs to be recognized and clearly stated. The deep demonstration is simply building on going a little bit further beyond that. The deep demonstration also was arrived at from how can EU institutions support Slovenia's ambitious goal for circular economy transition. And it happened that Climate-KIC itself, as we're moving in our strategy from financing what we call incremental innovation to transformational innovation, happened to fit the right moment, the right time, that this is what Climate-KIC is committed to, and this is what Slovenia's vision for a transition to a circular economy looks like. So this is how the building blocks that you mentioned were all there, and they were all very strong building blocks to go on. And it's going to build on the concept of collaboration as we move forward, as we move into implementation. Whilst the collaboration with the ministries thus far on all the scoping, the designing, and now setting up implementation has been critical to ensure public administration commitment, which is needed for the rigorous, to ensure that there's a rigor to implementation, ensure that this is not just another 1 year, 2 year project. All the other stakeholders, including those that you mentioned, will be a fundamental part of this. There's no way to move ahead without that. So whilst to overcome these barriers, I think that as we're moving forward, and as entities like Circular Change, Zero Waste Scotland, all the others that are here today are pushing on this, we're getting more and more accustomed and used to what does it mean? How do we get involved? How do we work together? What are the gaps? How do we address those gaps? I foresee that collaboration is going to be facilitated by us moving each little bit that we learn as we're moving, and we're moving quite quickly now, which is fantastic, will happen. And it will not, Climate-KIC is also, I should say, is working on the same level in many other regions and countries. So it's not just Slovenia, although Slovenia is definitely at the front runner of this. This is something that Climate-KIC is getting involved in across Europe.
So thank you very much. We really appreciate that we have Climate-KIC now engaged in this whole story.